I forgot I wasn't recording. We're talking about the golden age of Greece, how this is the pinnacle of Greek civilization, and how they got there is they were challenged by Persia, and the Persians, led by their emperor Darius, invaded Greece and the Athenians met them at the Battle of Marathon, and nobody expected the Athenians to win. And when the Athenians defeated the Persians at the Battle of Marathon, Theodippides sprinted 26.2 miles from Marathon to Athens to announce victory and then died. And that's where we get the legend of the marathon. Okay? All right, so after Darius comes his successor, and his name is Xerxes. 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 Xerxes wanted to, additionally, he wanted to follow in Darius's footsteps and conquer, expand the power of the Persian Empire. And so he led an army of 180,000 into Greece. Now, at the time in which he does this, it's fall. It's like October, November. Now, they didn't have anything called October or November then, because we use a Roman calendar, and the Romans aren't even around yet. But it would have been that time of year, okay? Almost winter. And if you know anything about like fighting and military strategies, you don't want to have your military out camping in the winter, especially if they have to move, because there's no like paved roads. You have to move everything on foot or with horses, and the roads get very muddy very quickly, and you can get snowed in, and it can be tragic. And so when these 180,000 soldiers arrive in Greece, they arrive in like the wilderness, but they're heading towards cities. And the king of Sparta, whose name was Leonidas, wanted to go and meet them and stop them. But he was told by the other leaders of Sparta, because Sparta had an oligarchy, not just one person in charge, not a monarchy, it was an oligarchy, that he could not take the army out because it was so close to winter. So Leonidas said, well, I won't take the army out. I'm going to take 300 of my personal bodyguards. He took 300 soldiers, 300, and met 180,000 soldiers in battle at the Battle of Thermopylae. And the battle lasted for 3 days. Now, the Spartans ultimately lose, but can you imagine 300 versus 180,000 and you're able to fight for 3 days? We're talking like every Spartan that was there probably killed 100 men. All right? You guys remember what we talked about the Spartans in the first section, right? How their entire civilization is based on what? War, fighting, military. And so, if you ever heard the movie 300, it's kind of violent and not really appropriate for you guys, but that's what that movie is based on, okay? The Battle of Thermopylae. Now, ultimately, the Spartans lose because it's 300 versus 180,000. Of course they're going to lose. But what eventually happens is that it becomes a rallying cry for the rest of Greece. So it's not just the Spartans that are fighting the Persians. It's the Spartans, the Athenians, the Acadians. They all join together as free Greek citizens and fight back against the Persians and eliminate the Persians from the Greek peninsula. And they win the Persian War by defending their homeland. So the Persians are defeated. Okay? Now, after that time, the city-state of Athens really begins to grow. It really begins to grow. So after defeating the Persians, Athens forms a league that unites Greece together. And that league is called the Delian League. Delian. Delian League. And the Delian League was formed and led by this man whose name is Pericles. 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 Okay, Pericles. Pericles. Now, Pericles is really a tyrant. He's a tyrant. Now, when you hear the word tyrant, what do you think? Like, yeah, like not just any kind of ruler, but a harsh ruler. Well, even though he was a tyrant, he does things that are good for people. One of the things he does is he says, yeah, I'm a tyrant and I'm in charge, and you know what I'm going to do? You guys get to make decisions for yourselves. You get to rule yourselves. What is that called where the people get to rule? Democracy. And Pericles gives direct democracy to the people of Athens. Now, in America, we don't have direct democracy. We don't vote on every single thing. We have a republic, or a representative democracy, where we choose people to make decisions for us. And if they do a good job, we vote for them. If they do a bad job, we vote for somebody else. That's how we do it in America. A direct democracy is not like that. In a direct democracy, the citizens vote on everything. Every day you're voting. You know, it's hard enough for Americans to get out once a year to vote. They were voting almost every day, every week. Okay? So, that's what direct democracy was all about. All right? So, there are other forms of government that existed in ancient Greece. We talked about oligarchy, which is what they had in Sparta, where a few wealthy citizens have the power. That's what an oligarchy is. You have a monarchy, like mono, meaning one, like monarchy, one government, one person in power. And that would be, usually its powers handed down from generation to generation, typically father to son, typically. And that's a monarchy. And then there's tyranny. Tyranny is similar to monarchy, only you don't take control through inheritance, you take it through military strength. And that's how Pericles did it. Only when Pericles took over, he gave the power to the people. Gave them democracy, with the power in the hands of the many, where power is not in the hands of either one or a few. Okay? Now, we are all very biased on this, as we are all Americans. And we all say, this one is the best, democracy. Well, and if you look at history, what's the most common form of government on earth today? Democracy, okay? That was not always the case. At the time of Pericles, the most common form of governments were these. There were way more of these than there were of these. In fact, Greece had the only one. And then after it disappeared, it was gone really until America. So democracy is really a new form of government. Even though its idea is old with the Greeks, the putting it into practice is a pretty new thing. We're still working on ours. It's by no means safe. Okay? Now, the thing about this, about democracy, is that there is the potential for corruption, as you are probably aware. And sometimes if a citizen becomes too powerful or too ambitious, they have to be ostracized. This is where they get turned into a big bird. That's ostracized. What is ostracized? More lame dad jokes. What is ostracized? Anybody know? If I'm going to say, Grace, you are ostracized from my classroom. You can't come in anymore. You're kicked out. Okay? So, what ostracizing citizens was in Greece, if somebody became too powerful or somebody was becoming a little too ambitious, the people of Greece could vote and have them kicked out. And they did that by writing a person's name on a piece of broken pottery. Just like this one, which is an artifact of ancient Greece. Athens, as a matter of fact. And once you had a certain number of pieces of broken pottery with your name on it, you were kicked out of Athens for 10 years. You had to leave. You had to go somewhere else. This is a way to prevent tyranny. It's a way to prevent dictatorship so that one person could not become too powerful. So it's really a primitive form of checks and balances, which is what we have. Only we're not ostracizing anybody. Okay? Okay, so now, government is all great and well, but government cannot function effectively unless people have a little money in their pocket. And so let's look at how people made money. And what that is the economy. Economics is the study of how things are made, bought, sold, and used. That's really all it is. Things would also include money, like currency. So, just like almost every other ancient civilization, their economy was based on what? Trade and farming, agriculture, okay? Now, remember, what's the geography of Greece like? Mountainous, not great for large-scale agriculture, but there are certain products that do grow well in the mountains. Can you guys think of some? Well, I got some pictures of, what are these?
Olives.
Olives. Okay, what can you do with olives? Those are some, yeah. What can you do? You can make olive oil, which is helpful. You can eat the olives. Okay, so it's a pretty versatile product. Olive oil is important. It has a lot of that healthy fat content. That's good for people's diets. All right. What else could they grow? Grapes. Make wine. Absolutely. We have a vineyard ourselves right here in our own school district, right in Crab Orchard. So grapes do grow well in the mountains. Okay. Animals were also easy. What kind of animals do well in mountains? Goats and sheep. Cows, they can do okay, but they need a lot of pasture. Goats and sheep, they're literally meant for the mountain. Mountain goats, okay? Bighorn sheep, they're intended to live in the mountains. So goats and sheep were very, very, very popular. But like I said, the main things that they did: grapes, olives, sheep, goats, agriculture, and then they would trade. This is actually some artwork. It shows trade. You got a scale here, and they're measuring things out, trading. Okay. Now, within your own family in Athens, much like the rest of the ancient world, it is patriarchal. What does that mean, patriarchal? What does the word patriarchal mean? Dominated by men. Dominated by men. If it were dominated by women, it would be matriarchal. But it's dominated by men, so it's patriarchal. Like mama, matriarchal. Papa, patriarchal. It's an easy way to remember it. Okay? But within your own family, your average Athenian household would have a husband, a wife, however many children they have, and then slaves. Slavery was a large aspect of Greek culture. And the more slaves that you had, the more status you had. So if you walked through the streets of Athens and you have 4 or 5 slaves following you around, that's a status symbol. It's like having a posse. I mean, honestly, it was a status symbol. So when it came to the role of women, everything ran through the man. Your family name, everything. Women's role was to have babies. What kind of babies?
Lots.
And what kind? Healthy and boys. That was a woman's job, which really has nothing to do with the women. I mean, the men carry the genetic material to determine, the sex of a child. But the women's role was to have male children and to carry on the family name. That was extremely important. Women received no education. There were no schools for women, and they typically married around the age of 14. How old are you guys?
15.
Oh, you'd already have a couple kids by now. You wouldn't be in school either. Not great. And traditionally, guys and gals, ancient world is not good for women. So, fortunately, we're making some strides. Okay? All right. So that's family life. Get into a little bit of Greek culture. You guys all love drama, don't you? You're all teenagers, right? Drama. Love it. It's not the kind of drama we're talking about. We're talking about like theater. Okay? You guys see these masks? These masks represent two types of theater performances. What are the two types? Happy and sad, also known as comedy and tragedy. Comedies and tragedies. Okay? And these are the types of stories that were told in outdoor Greek theaters, like this one. Imagine like 3,000 years ago going to watch a play. And then I think that would be kind of cool. You know? What do you think their plays were about? Myths, absolutely. Do they have any stories that they were pretty popular? The Iliad and the Odyssey that told the stories of past Greek heroes. Women, you were not allowed to act. Only men were allowed to act. Even if you were playing a woman, it was a man dressed as a woman. No women were allowed to be theater performers in the early days. But yeah, they had tragedies and comedies. Tragedies are obviously, look at the sad faces. That's the this serious drama. And it's usually about a theme like love or hate or war or betrayal. Lots of Greek Greek tragedies like that. One's called Medea. Now that's not like Tyler Perry's Medea. Okay, there's a Medea. It's about Jason and the Argonauts, and this woman named Medea is betrayed by her husband, and so she kills all her children. I mean, it's terrible. Okay, terrible. It's tragic. All right, but they would act it out. And then the other is comedy. Now, you guys would really enjoy the comedy because it's like slapstick humor. I mean, it's so fun. Mr. Moore. Hey. Mm-hmm. I certainly will. Yes, ma'am. You're welcome. After class, you can go to Miss Terry. You left your book.
Oh.
Comedies are like slapstick. You guys know what slapstick humor is? Very sarcastic. And it's also kind of like physical comedy, like falling down, like old vaudeville type stuff. I mean, you'd probably like it. It also contained a lot of satire. What is satire? Satire is basically you make fun of people, particularly politicians, because there were politicians, because it was democracy. So usually it was the unwealthy people making fun of the wealthy people. And it was funny. And it was usually wildly inappropriate. It would be definitely rated R in your all's eyes. Okay? Lots of references about, sexuality and nudity and things of that nature. Okay? But that is what comedies and tragedies were. Okay? Making, the comedies were like slapstick humor and satire, making fun of politicians. Okay? I think it would be neat to go back in time and watch an old Greek drama. As long as you could I don't speak Greek though. It's all Greek to me. Okay? Moving on, we'll talk about things aren't always great. There's more war. Who can pronounce that big long P word? The Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War could be seen as a civil war because it was fought between Sparta and Athens. Now, just going into it, you would say, the Spartans are going to completely annihilate them. Their entire culture is based on military, and the Athenians are all based on like economics and philosophy, and they have no chance. Well, Sparta does have an excellent army, one of the finest armies in the history of armies to this day. But the Athenians have something that the Spartans don't have. They have a navy. What is a navy? That's right. They're like soldiers that fight on boats. So they have control of the seas. Who do you think would win? if one has an awesome army, but the other has an awesome navy?
Navy.
Why do you think the Navy would win?
Because
Because
they-
they're surrounded by oceans.
Do you think the Spartans depend upon trade and things of that nature?
Yes.
They do. They do. So let's see what happens. We mentioned, the Athenian. Like, look at my little Lego Spartan soldiers. That's a lot of Lego men. So that would be the Spartans, the Legos. And then the Athenians would have the boats. And then they would have dominance over the sea. So what happens is the Spartans do what they do, and they marched to Athens. And the people of Athens, all Greek polises have two things. One, they have an Acropolis, and they have an Agora. What is an Acropolis? It's one of your vocabulary words. What's an Acropolis?
It's a refuge on top of the
That's right. And all the people of Athens remained safe inside that refuge, inside the Acropolis. So the people were safe there. But what happens is a plague breaks out. Not the plague, not the Black Plague, but a plague. Kind of like we have a plague right now. And this plague that breaks out is highly contagious and was very deadly. We think our plague is deadly. Their plague, if you caught it, you had a 33% chance of dying. 1 in 3 people died of the plague that was in that. Probably some form of smallpox. Okay? So 1 in 3 people died. And so the city of Athens is surrounded. A plague is ravaging through their stronghold. And, but the people of Sparta still have to stay there. But Athens was well supplied because of their navy, and so they didn't have to give up. And it took 20 years of living in that way, being surrounded by the Spartan army before they just basically signed a truce to end it. And the Spartans went home, and the Athenians went about their lives. So really, kind of an ineffectual ending to the Peloponnesian War. Okay? But once that ends, the Athenians can get back to focusing on other things. They don't have to focus on war and politics much. They can begin to focus on human behavior. And that is where you begin to see the philosophers emerge. What is the word? The word philosophy is a Greek word. What does it mean? Philo, like file, like file. What does that mean? It means love. It means love. Sophie, comes from the Greek word Sophia, like our little town at the bottom of the hill. What does Sophia mean in Greek? Wisdom. And I'm sure if you've met someone from Sophia, that makes total sense, right? Yeah. So what does philosophy mean? The love of wisdom. So philosophy is all about thinking and how to learn. It's an organized system of thought. And you can have a philosophy on anything. Can't you? Yeah. And the Greeks take full advantage of that. And the first thing the Greeks wanted to do is they wanted to begin to use rational thought to explain nature. What is rational thought?
Like what we think today.
I'm going to use my brain to come up with proof of why something happens the way it does. Right? Like, if it starts raining outside, I'm going to say, well, there must be like a weather system moving through cumulonimbus clouds and a low pressure system. I'm not going to say Zeus is mad. Right? Because you saying Zeus is mad, is that rational? It's not. It's not. I can't prove that. But I can prove all the other stuff, okay? Using modern meteorology, okay? So that is this thinking, the way of thinking began with the ancient Greeks, the idea of using rational thought. Now, do you think everybody was on board with that? Because what are you essentially saying here?
The gods.
Gods don't exist. The gods are fake. That is what you're saying if you do this. So do you think that there was some violence that occurred as a result of this new way of thinking? Yes. One group of people who traveled about and taught about rational thought were called the Sophists. Sophists. The Sophists were traveling teachers, and they were very skeptical about the existence of the gods. And they taught things like math and physics and history and music and astronomy. These hard, concrete things. 2 plus 2 equals 4. All right? The ancient Greeks are some of the people responsible for mathematical things. You guys ever had geometry? Invented by the Greeks. A guy by the name of Euclid. You ever heard of Euclidean geometry? Well, he was a Greek philosopher, and he's the one that, or Pythagoras, Pythagorean theorem, Pythagoras, he's Greek. And they all lived around this time period, okay? But the Sophists, they traveled around doing things like that. But there are 3 major Greek philosophers. Now, if you looked at this is a painting called The School of Athens, and it was done by a guy by the name of Raphael during the Renaissance. And it has a lot of famous Greek philosophers. It even has Alexander the Great, right, standing right here. So lots of famous Greek people in this. But the 3 famous ones you have to know. First, who can say this person's name? Socrates. I always get somebody to say Socrates, and that's okay. It's Socrates. Socrates. Socrates is probably one of the greatest. Well, he is one of the greatest of these. These 3 I'm going to tell you about. They are the 3 greatest. But he would use what's now known as the Socratic method. He would ask questions to guide students to the correct answer. This is using high-level critical thinking skills. Okay? Using probing questions to create better definitions. For example, I want you guys to tell me the characteristics of a cat. Tell me the characteristics of a cat. Tail. Fur. Ears. What? 4 legs. Whiskers. Big eyes. Okay, anything else? We could go on a lot, right? So, now I'm going to be like Socrates. So, you guys have explained to me the physical characteristics of a cat, right? Why are these the physical characteristics of a cat? Are there any reasons that you could doubt that these may be wrong? So, by definition, there's your cat. Right? That's a cat, right? Does it have a tail? Does it have fur? Does it have ears? 4 legs? Whiskers? Big eyes? Cat! Is your assumption wrong? You need to come up with a better definition. This is how Socrates did things, okay? He proved you wrong, right? This is obviously not a cat. What makes a cat a cat? What makes a dog a dog? You got to get deeper, right? What makes a cat have catness? And what has a dog have dogness? You have to get deeper, all right? And that's where Socrates came in, okay? I'm glad that worked out perfectly. I'll never know how that's going to work out. Okay. So, that's what Socrates is all about. You have to be able to improve your description of what a cat is, okay? You may have to go into what it sounds like. You may have to go into its behaviors, okay? All right. Another of the famous Greek philosophers is a man by the name of Plato. Kind of like the stuff you played with as a kid, right? Oh, it's Play-Doh. This is Plato. Plato is widely known as one of the greatest philosophers of Western civilization. And the thing that he is famous for is he wrote a book called The Republic. The Republic. And the Republic is a book on government. And it's important because what kind of government do we have in America? We have a democracy. Not only a democracy, a Republican democracy, where we elect people to represent us. That's what that means, republic. Okay? So, and he was writing books about this thousands of years ago. So we hold Plato in a high regard. Now, Plato, he created a school in Athens, and he called it the Academy. The Academy. Okay? That's all it was called. Remember, there's a lot of pushback going on against these philosophers. So much so, do you see Socrates here? I'm going to go back to Socrates. This is also a Renaissance thing. Socrates, this is him in the middle. And this is on the last day of his life because he was found guilty of corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens. And he was put to death. And this cup is not wine. It's poison. He had to drink poison. So, he was put to death for corrupting the minds of the young people of Athens by telling them that they need to come up with better definitions. Okay? Also telling them that the gods weren't real. All right? So it was kind of risky. It was kind of risky to be these people. Plato opens up a school to teach kids these things. Pretty risky. And one of his best students was a man named Aristotle. Aristotle. He was a student of Plato at the Academy. Aristotle is widely regarded as the first scientist ever because he was very interested in classification, classifying things. How do you classify things in science? Yeah. And you can do that by observing them and doing experiments. For example, if we wanted to, go back to this. I want to classify this thing. We need to do better than what we did, didn't we? Tail, fur, ears, forelegs, whiskers, and big eyes. We got to do better than that. So Aristotle is going to observe cats and observe dogs and do experiments on them. And that way he can better classify things. Now, he's not going to do it to just cats and dogs. He's going to do it with plants and other animals and rocks and the stars. He does so many types of things. He wrote several books on several topics. I can't even write one book. He wrote several books on things like ethics and logic and politics and poetry and geometry and biology and physics. Super smart guy. And he created the basis for the modern scientific method. Do you guys know what that is? Yeah, that's part of it. You identify a problem. I'm no scientist, so I could be wrong. You identify a problem, and you say, okay, I'm going to do some observations. I'm going to make a hypothesis. I'm going to do some experiments. Then I'm going to report my results and I think that's conclusion. That's an Aristotelian idea, meaning it came from Aristotle. Aristotelian. All right? So this is the golden age of Greece. Contact me, and you guys in here, I'll see you. It'll be a while, but if you need me, we talked about that Teams link, and if you're at home listening, I'll tell you about the Teams meeting stuff tomorrow.